I'd say hello to Barbara Kay. Welcome to this broadcast, and thanks for agreeing to do it.
It's my pleasure, Rex. Great to be here.
You have a low threshold for pressure. That's what I would suggest to you. Let's start where everyone's mind is at this particular time. We've been in more than a year into this latest phantasmagoria with COVID, which began, as I seem to recall, for a 2-week flatten the curve thing. What do you think from your own context and the people you meet with outside of all the journalism? What are people saying and thinking about at this time on this particular subject?
People are very unsettled that I know. They want to know exactly what they can do with the vaccine. We've all, people my age have, most everybody I know has had their first shot, and now it's like, great, can we do stuff? Oh, no, don't even think about it. So we're like, well, can we travel a bit? No. Can my grandchildren take up hockey again? They're no, don't even think about that. So we feel like we're in the same place, and yet we're supposed to be hopeful. But I do find I don't think things are very clear in our minds about what this portends. Normally, when you're vaccinated against something, you're good to do whatever you want to do, but that doesn't seem to be the case here. And
yeah, it is. That's a fairly. I've been following that too. I mean, it's extremely curious. By the way, we must have an Apollo launch to get a vaccine. We're going to put all the resources of Western intelligence to get it, and then we get it. And even in Canada, however slowly in Canada, and if you get the vaccine, what has changed? I mean, have you ever experienced anything like that before?
No. This is entirely new, and what seems to be from the authorities is a wish to keep the fear going. Well, you're vaccinated, but there's a new variant coming. I thought the vaccine kind of handled that. Well, we don't really know, So I think people are getting very they're how can I say, they're very willing to be. I think people are very willing to be cooperative when they feel they understand why they're being deprived. And I get the sense now that everybody's a little bewildered and upset. Some people are quite angry. We've had a few cases of people being arrested, and we don't think it's so terrible what they've done. We're looking at what's happening in other countries. There's so much incompetence with this, and we don't usually know that our own countries, how incompetent they are. But in this case, we're able to compare with other countries all the time. And if we didn't see that list every single day of, Israel, 105%. I didn't know you could do that. But anyways, 105% vaccinated, and all the way down, we're number 43. We're getting explanations that don't make sense to a lot of us. We're not happy campers, but we don't quite know what to do about it.
I agree with you that especially in the early, not days, but months, in any province territories, when regulations were announced, or health officers made decrees, or premiers or other leaders said, here's the game. Most Canadians, maybe a little bit too easily, but it was early. And it was more unknown. Said, okay, we want to protect ourselves, but also we want to protect our fellow citizens. But now that you've got a year to look at it, and you go back, as many people in journalism, I'm reading some of Brian Lilly's stuff, for example, he's kept a very good monitor on this, that the contradictions in the early days, don't close the airports, don't stop travel from China, go out to the Chinese restaurants, or you're somehow or other not acting as a decent human being. Masks are no good. In fact, they may accelerate the transmission. 2 months later, if you don't wear a mask, you're a pariah dog. And now, by the way, here's the interesting. When people now come back, some people, and are ordered into these hotels. I saw a couple of stories where for 2 or 3 nights stay, people are being dinged $3,000 for their own quarantine. How do you unravel all of these? There are contradictions, and as you said incompetence, but you can't have one set of directions in the first 2 months. Don't do this, don't do that. Masks are no good. and then have an imperial edict that if you don't wear a mask, we'll haul you off to some hotel jail.
The hotel thing is particularly unnerving because these are people. A lot of these people, I know. My sister is fully vaccinated now. She's had 2 doses. She's in Florida. Wants to come back. They won't let you book at these hotels until 3 days ahead. But you have to book your flights more than 3 days ahead. And then, no, I mean, it really is to stay in these places. They're claustrophobic. They're horrible service. You have to pay for them. If you
Food is
live alone,
great.
yeah,
The
why
food is
can't you
great.
walk out of the airport? Yeah, why can't you walk out of the airport if you live alone and you're vaccinated and just go home and promise to stay there? Like, why is there so little trust from the government that you'll do what you're told? I mean, Canadians do, on the whole, what they're told, and you're more likely to run into trouble at a hotel, I would say, than in your own home where.
And there's this other point too. I mean, we have all sorts of enforcement for the criminal laws and all of those things, but you can have certain kinds of gatherings and everyone is standing back and approving that this is a necessary one. We had one this summer for Black Lives Matter, but if you have another type of gathering, the zeal of the police force under the direction, I'm certain, of governments, plural, just go heartily mad. I mean, you're out here without a mask and there's a dog by your foot. There's something completely out of range in the way that we're covering this. And I go back to your earlier statement. Maybe governments, not consciously, although I suppose I could be more cynical, but they kind of enjoy that, in this case, we can do it by fiat. We don't have to really have consensus.
Honestly, I get the feeling they want the situation to continue. They're happy campers. They're doing, the government has a pretty free hand. I'm not one of these conspiracy theorists, but I do think this idea, I think, when you said that Black Lives Matter thing, when they thought it was okay for crowds to gather for that because it was a matter of public health for people to protest that kind of injustice, that was okay, but it's not okay for people to go to church. Something in me, my cynicism level really went up quite a big notch and never came back down. And I thought, this is manipulation of the public in a way that I find a little, it's more than patronizing. It's very anti-democratic, I feel.
My point is, this is not original by any means. Hundreds have noticed it. Ever since the beginning of this thing, is the thing we determine is essential and the thing we determine is not essential. The poor grocery workers, for example, who are still, I expect, laboring under a minimum wage. They've been out there for a year plus. You can throw in the truckers and farmers and other people as well. Then you have the people who are deemed non-essential. They would be members of parliament. We can close that thing down. I don't know how they reach the categories that they reach. And then finally, and this is more current because we're seeing some backlash from the Archbishop in Toronto. You're seeing some legal cases out west. You can go to, that's your favorite example. You can go to Costco. You can go to the large supermarkets, and there are hundreds there. I've been there. However, you better not go to mass or you better not go to the synagogue. How do you make that discrimination?
Well, I think, I don't know how they make that discrimination. I mean, the liquor stores are open, of course. And this idea that houses of worship it's a completely fungible notion, that people's spiritual health, if you like, or their feeling of community togetherness, it would mean a great deal to a lot of people who live alone if once a week for an hour, wearing masks, distance, they could sit quietly in a pew listening to some uplifting choral music and a sermon, and just to say hello to their neighbors, quietly go and quietly go home. I really don't see how that is not a perfectly acceptable. I mean, you're not even as close as you are in the grocery stores with other people. There is something symbolic to me about this insistence that houses of worship are inessential to people, but liquor stores, well, we all agree that liquor stores are essential. Okay, nobody's gonna push back against that. No, and that public gatherings to protest racism at very close quarters and yelling and doing stuff that is supposed to be super spreading, And the prime minister comes out of his house to do that, but not the other. So I think if you're not cynical about a lot of this top-down authoritarianism, then there's something wrong with you. You're not paying attention.
Well, on a truly higher level, I think that probably the biggest unanswered question in all of this, we knew we needed a response. Most governments of the world gave a response. Most of them imitated each other in that we have the throw income supports and all this stuff. Meantime, incidentally, all the civil servants, the journalists, the teachers, etc. There's a whole separate class that haven't borne any of the economic brunt, but government itself, having relieved itself of the necessity of going to parliament, also comes in with the most vast expenditure of government money since whenever.
Yeah.
They don't put in any budgets. We have amputated debates on Zoom calls in Parliament. I don't know when the political system of Canada has either been so fragile or so shattered as it has been in the last year.
I agree with you. I find this lack of accountability. There's just nobody seems to be accountable to anybody, and the fact that Parliament is not meeting regularly, and that the Prime Minister is not there all the time, that he has chosen to spend most of his time locked up in his house, and not set an example when he expects, nurses and doctors are out there, grocery clerks are out there, but not teachers. And our kids, there are children in the public school system that have not had anything like what you would call a real education for a year. They are a year behind. They're going to be a year behind kids in private school who are getting a very decent education, whose teachers managed to get their act together with this Zoom stuff, and they haven't missed a beat. They're now back in school. Some are 3 days a week, some are 5 days. It depends on the school. I think the children have borne a ridiculous burden during this whole thing when they are the least likely to suffer from it. And this bothers me very much. I have 5 grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
They've had, their social life has been almost completely truncated. Their sports, which are very important to them, as if this is not essential to children's psychological and physical growth. It is essential for them to be with other kids. There's a tremendous depression amongst kids and in teenagers, depression amounting to serious depression. In some case, I don't know if suicides are due to this or the fact that it's one thing too much because they already have trouble going on at home or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The people that are most vulnerable and the least able to make their opinions known, they're the ones that are bearing the brunt. It's very troublesome.
That's the point. The ones that are, I'll use crude metaphors, down the ladder. Go back to the clerks. They've been there every single day, most of them, because we all go to supermarkets or corner stores. Are either younger or they're immigrants, recent or otherwise. They're people who are on the struggle. All the small businesses, incidentally, and I mean small businesses, tiny coffee shops in some cases, niche stores, little tiny. All of these people must be in a frantic state. Will my business survive? Has it survived? Mm-hmm. Can I send the daughter and the son to college now that I've been closed for a whole year? And then there's the second tier. Journalism is one. As I said, the government employees, the real professionals, they can keep their business going. They get huge subsidies when they do. And this division is not being sufficiently highlighted, I don't think, either by various oppositions, plural, including the federal, or in some cases by the journalistic community. There's an awful flow of information about numbers, and we got 300 more today and this and that. Not the deep analysis or the comparative studies that you would expect. And then when this thing is over, assuming it is at some point, what for the next 2 years after all this money has gone out, all these jobs being lost, all these people have gotten anxiety. I think we're in for a hard, rough time.
Yes, I agree with you. I think we're in for a very rough time, and we haven't even calculated out all the things that are. There's a tremendous number of people who have put off getting medical treatment because they are prioritizing anything to do with COVID. Uh, I can't even imagine. I don't even have the imagination. But I do have the feeling this money that's just been hemorrhaging out. These, to me, these are numbers I can't even handle in my head. This number of
Yep.
billions and billions. And the only reason they don't look so monstrous is because you hear trillions and trillions going out in the
Yes.
States. But so, oh well, we're only spending 300 billion compared to all these trillions. But honestly, we used to think, I'm old enough to remember when $10 billion was considered a huge deficit. And when the deficit, I remember that when the days when the deficit got to like over 20 or 30, this was a reason to bring a government down if they couldn't, and I know we're in hard times, and I know, but I can't believe this money is going out responsibly, because I don't think this government is responsible. It's
Well,
not a very good
I think
government.
there's a bigger thing there, the inadequacy of the controls, the evisceration of Parliament, the lack of support for a full Auditor General during a period when we most need Auditors General, and that we won't see it now. It'll be something like sponsorship in a different way, as a couple of years pass and the resources are finally available to start tracking where, to whom, how fast, how sourced, the amount of potential mischief bound up in this tremendous expenditure that will come back in 3, 4, and 5 years, I think, is immense.
I do agree with you, and as I say, the lack of accountability and the use of the money to essentially buy people's silence, to buy. Uh, and by the way, I don't blame people who are getting money for being a bit quiescent, a bit passive. But honestly, this government seems to me to still be in power because they're paying people to just sit there and take the money and not criticize. And the longer they can do that. And the other thing that's very bothersome is they're using the money to change the economy in other ways. They want to advance their climate agenda. They want
Yes,
to
yes.
advance all these other reset items, and they're doing the same in the States. Uh, we haven't had any discussion about this. They're doing it. I don't see that we're having any public debate about almost anything these days. That's what strikes me.
I know, I really, really do agree with you. These are, again, I think I said it once before, it's the biggest crisis we've had since the Second World War. It's the most outlandish expenditures we've ever seen. It's the first time we closed down Parliament. It's the first time we've gone 2 full years without a budget, and considering that this is the biggest amount of money ever. And I don't know, you could get a better discussion of Jane Fonda's latest thing than you'll get about the demise of Canadian democracy.
And why during this period of pandemic was it so necessary? And why did the government consider it two bills so urgent? One that would make it easier to bump yourself off for just about any reason whatsoever. And the other, I'm talking, of course, about C7, Bill C7,
Yes.
amplify the ease with which one can access euthanasia, and C6, which is about making sure that therapists by no means hinder, a 6-year-old child from changing his or her gender, because by actually asking any questions that might reveal that gender dysphoria wasn't the sole basis for their concern and distress.
Let me stop you just to go one at a time on both of those. Give me a more expanded understanding of the assisted suicide amplification, as you termed it. What's there? And I agree with you, incidentally, if we can't debate, inverted commas, life and death issues in a pandemic, when is the time to do it? But just go on about the bill itself.
Well, the bill is a response to a Superior Court decision in Quebec that was made with regard to 2 plaintiffs that felt that even though their death was not reasonably foreseeable, in the sense that they had severe disabilities, and reasonable foreseeability was the condition under which one was able to have what's called medical assistance in dying MAID. And that was the baseline. So they petitioned for euthanasia because their lives, they had such serious disabilities, and they were not getting the kind of care that made them feel life was worth living. And they wanted the law changed so that they could have access. And the Superior Court justice agreed with them. This was called the Truchon case. And the government of Canada, instead of saying, oh, we're going to take this to appeal, which the government usually does if they want their own law to stand, not only did they not take it to appeal, but they said, okay, we're going to give ourselves the deadline of now, and we're going to not only agree with this decision and say that your death shouldn't have to be reasonably foreseeable, but we're going to, and the Senate has expanded it to pretty well anybody who's in serious distress over their future possibilities in life, including mental illness, should have. They've shortened the 10-day period of reflection to 1 day. They've shortened the number of witnesses you need. They've made it easier and easier. But the horrible thing about this bill, and it is that it makes, instead of saying people with disabilities are now petitioning to end their lives. One of the people in that case, Jean Truchon, that's why it's called the Truchon case, he had told his friend, he said, I'm not getting the services. If I could only get more hours a week of care, then I would not want to commit suicide, but I'm not getting that care. So instead of saying this is terrible, everybody with disabilities should have care adequate to make them feel life is worth living. And a lot of the people who are asking for euthanasia, it's because they're not getting the level of care or home. They want to be at home with assisted care at home, which is cheaper than being in the hospital. I know several cases. It's so heartbreaking. And so the people with disabilities are very frightened by this law, because what's happening is that doctors, as soon as one woman, for example, she came into the hospital with cerebral palsy, not for that reason. She had pneumonia, whatever she had, and she was having trouble breathing. And the doctor said, do you want oxygen? And she said, of course I want oxygen. And he said, are you sure? The fact that she was severely disabled made him think, oh, here's a good candidate for euthanasia. And he asked several times. It frightened her. Like,
It
why?
should.
I mean, yes, it should, but that's the mindset now. And this new C7 is going to make Canada one of the most permissive countries in the world for access to euthanasia. It's a very slippery slope. They're going to, next time around, they'll be saying that minors should be allowed to have it, as they do in the Netherlands, for example, kids 12 and over. And it's not well thought out, because what they're really saying is we're not prepared to put more money into palliative care or to assisted care.
Okay.
You know? So they're looking at the budget, and they have looked at the budget, and they say, gee, you know what? Saves us a hell of a lot of money if people decide to.
It's a strange thing that they're worried about saving money in that small corner of the expenditure while they're running on Niagara Falls in another direction, but leave that. I want to go now to this question of the transgender bill, as I will call it, because you in particular have been quite valorous in opposing some of the more radical and certainly some of the more angry messages from one of the interest groups. What's the crux of your concerns and your qualifications about transgenderism?
Well, it's not transgenderism per se that is the problem. It's what to do about a very real condition called gender dysphoria. Everybody knows gender dysphoria exists. And it can happen to very young children who say, I'm not a boy, I know I'm supposed to be a girl, or I want to be a girl, or whatever, or the opposite. And in even 20 years ago, 10 years ago, a very fine doctor, like an expert in the field of gender dysphoria, like Dr. Ken Zucker, for example, who got fired from CAMH in Toronto. Okay, so he knows more about it than almost anybody in the world. And his attitude was, you treat the whole child. And if parents bring a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old child to him that wants to be the opposite sex, he doesn't just say, well, I guess you were born in the wrong body. Let's think about puberty blockers. He tries to see, is there something going on in this child's
Mhm.
life that is giving them distress? And his theory is, since 80% of children who say they want to be the opposite sex in early childhood, when they finish puberty, they go back to between 80 and 95% of kids who are very persistent about wanting to be the opposite sex in childhood become comfortable with their biological sex after puberty. And he knows this because many studies have around the world have shown that. And so what he'll try to do to a certain degree is see if there's some way of making the child feel comfortable in their own body. That's the first approach. That's no longer allowed. And I've had conversations with Dr. Zucker, and he says, look, if it past 7 years old, if a child is very persistent, then it's very possible they're never going to change. And then you try to make them comfortable with the idea of self-presentation, how they're going to do it. But
Mhm.
you don't rush into chemical aids. Now this bill is going to make it criminal in the criminal code. Bill C6 is going to make it a criminal. It's a crime for a therapist to say to a child or to parents, well, let's see if we can manage to make this 4-year-old or
Okay.
5-year-old, comfortable with the idea that, and that's going to be a crime unless they have to affirm. They have to affirm.
Well, let me just jump in there. What is it about the acceleration of certain, I suppose I'll call it the cause, certain causes that you go from not even being there at all, and centuries of it, and then within a matter of in the current day, in a matter of weeks, months, or even just a couple of years, one position becomes the only position, even if it is in contest with the traditions of centuries. But suddenly, very suddenly, like where you are on this particular matter, I think you're a moderate voice, and I'm going to get into the sports question in just a minute. But you're presenting arguments as opposed to diatribes. You cite, and I think honorably, a real expert opinion, because you hear the word expert these days tossed around for nothing. But suddenly, like with the federal government, we have to be on this side with the major media, the celebration of someone who announces he or she is now she or he. You're not allowed, or not, sorry, that's the wrong word. You really set yourself up for a heavy blast. So what's driving the acceleration and the declaration that, I'm sorry, on this issue, I don't want to hear you?
It's not as sudden as we think. A lot of these issues have been percolating in the universities for like 40 and 50 years. And the gender, race, the whole package of things that that there's supposedly only one side of the question on, they're all part of what you could put into a loose package that Jordan Peterson would probably, he would call it cultural Marxism. And they are an attempt to break down alleged power structures in gender, race, um, uh, other female, male. I mean, it's an attempt to break down what the old established power structures, dismantle it, and it's actually part of a whole revolution in thinking, so that what we took for granted as real, even science that we took as real, say biology, that there are two sexes. I mean, that's a fact. That's a scientific fact. But the new way of thinking is that you don't, truth is not something that can be arrived at objectively. And that when we say there's objective truth, that's simply our manner of speaking, because we are the current power structure being descended from European white, supremacist, imperial So when you break down the power structures, then you get different ways of
Okay.
knowing different truths. I mean, I hear myself, and I want to, slip my
Yeah.
wrist because it's
Yeah.
such
But
nonsense.
I bring it right to the current point though. Here's where I'm going with this thing is that we had a very liberated society in the 60s and 70s. In fact, liberation was the keyest word. Now, if you listen to the cluster that I will call the social justice warriors, there's a whole catalog of either particular issues, particular concerns, on which an edict is passed. They're the infallible ones. They're the Puritans. They're fundamentalist. And if you disagree with something fundamentalistly social justice, you're not supposed to be heard, or you're canceled, or at the very least, you're abused. Like when you speak about, and this is where I want to go, you speak about the visitation of female sports by males who have, inverted commas, transitioned to female, and say this makes no sense. You get savage for being all sorts of things.
Yes, this this rights movement, this trans rights movement, following in the footsteps of other supposed rights movements, has seemingly come out of nowhere. Although it was there, and it's very well funded, very high power lobby group, and it took many of us by surprise. And it's spoken of in the name of, they use the language of social justice, and its identity. Your identity is more important than anything else. And the words like compassion, inclusivity,
Diversity.
diversity. Yes. Okay. So, and what you feel you are, this idea of gender trumps science, it trumps facts, it trumps everything. And so you now have this, it really is a juggernaut. It's very hard to push back against these people because it's all in the name of uh, inclusivity, and they steal the language. And this is what bothers me the most. The left has always been very adept at co-opting language. So once they said, if you feel that you are a woman, then you are a woman, and they compel you to say it. Trans women are women. Say it, say it. You can get kicked off Twitter if you say a man is not a woman. A man cannot be a woman. A man can identify as a woman, but not a
Well,
woman.
why? Even again, the most blatant thing. This is particularizing, but I know exactly what you're saying there. When you have women and young girls who train mightily, who
Yep.
are gifted athletically, and by the way, people express themselves by what skills they have: be scholar, be strength, be speeding, be athletic, and they work very hard, and they go to contests, and then suddenly after maybe it was a week ago, somebody who was otherwise running in male races is now running in female or doing weightlifting. This is so absurd that I find it difficult to understand how there is even an argument.
Well, it's as difficult as it may be for you to understand. I had to come to terms with this, collaborating on this book with writer Linda Blade, a coach, the only coach in Canada, she's a high performance coach, a former heptathlete herself, Olympic level, tremendous PhD in kinesiology, who understands biology very, very well. And she's the only coach in Canada who has come out strongly and said, this is wrong, this is unethical, and can cite you chapter and verse. And our own sports associations, in Canada are telling us there's no real difference between male and female, or not enough to trump the idea of inclusivity. And this is they're so hepped on not offending trans women. Of course, this problem doesn't exist in the men's division, obviously, because a woman who thinks she's a man cannot compete against a real man, obviously. So the problem only exists, and they literally say, well, we don't really know if men are actually, intrinsically. They will say it boldly into your face, and you're supposed to argue at that level and say, but here's proof. I mean, there's a runner in the collegiate level in the States who was a man, a biological man. He was 390th in the men's division. And then he decided that he was really a woman. So he entered women's, it was hurdles, I think, or yes, I think it's hurdles.
Yeah, I think it was.
Ended up first. And his coach, when interviewed, he went from 390th to first. And his coach said, "I've never seen such mental determination in an athlete." Now, I know you're laughing, I'm laughing, but it's not laughing better.
How else
Okay,
could I respond?
I thought, okay, sports, it's one thing. In every other field, sure, trans women can be lawyers, they can be anything. But when it comes to sports, this is where the rubber's going to hit the road and everybody's going to react. No, that's crazy, you can't. But they're not.
Okay.
At the Olympics, it's like they're allowed. And all you have to say is, I identify. In Canada, all you have to say is, I identify as a woman. You don't have to have taken hormones. You don't have to have presented as you can even say, I'm a woman for running, and then the next year you can come back and say, what, I'm a man for high jumping.
There is no other circumstance in all the world, and never has been, where simply on your own autonomy and by mere utterance, I declare that you constitute a fact, a reality, or anything that corresponds to the nature of things. Simple declaration just doesn't cover it. I want to go just a bit further, let you go in a little while here, using this as a parable situation, as an illustration of a bigger problem. How much longer can countries like Canada and the US and Britain, which, many of the Western cultures that are indulging this hothouse of logic and fallacy, how much longer can you pretend to be thinking things are true that are not? And how much longer can societies that are willing to cast away the rudders of truth and genuine argument, how long can they continue this wild game? We're prosperous, so we have a bit of built-in leverage, a mattress, if you will. But you cannot indulge this level of irrationality on a continuous basis, bring it into the educational establishment, and maintain a society of any strength and force.
Well, but communist countries have done it for many, many years. I mean, the Soviet Union lasted a very long time, and every single person in it had to publicly lie.
At what cost? That's why we had the gulags, and we haven't gone there yet. We're doing it voluntarily. In the Soviet Union, it was imposed. This is what worries me, that so many people are conceding. The New York Times banishes a writer just because he had 47 years in the paper, but maybe said a wrong word at a wrong time. By the way, he didn't.
Well, I don't know how long we can continue as a good society, but certainly there are societies in the world that are not free and that do force people to say things, or they're forced not to say things. We have people afraid to say certain things in front of their children in case the child goes back to the school and tells the teacher that they've said certain things. I remember the late Professor John Furedy called it velvet totalitarianism. You don't go to the gulag, but you can be so shunned in public life that you will feel like you're in a kind of gulag. When people are shunned, or they, never mind losing their jobs and careers, which happens all the time, but when they are made to feel like social pariahs because they are not fit to be, with other people, and they're kicked off Twitter, or they're fired from their jobs. There have been suicides of people that have been isolated in this way, and I feel it's getting worse, not better. And you say, how long can we go on? In the gender area, it's true that in the United Kingdom, for example, there has been a little sanity returning, and their high court did come out. A young woman who had changed, who thought she wanted to be a man, and had been encouraged every step of the way. She launched a lawsuit and she won, and on the basis of Yeah. Okay. So that there's some sanity there.
There,
But
there is a bit of flex. I'll wind it up. This is more observation, and I'll get your own response to it too. When we speak about identity politics, it occurs to me in many situations. It's always, by the way, either sexual or ethnic or the color bar. But I often think differently. I think, for example, if you're a second-year student at some university, your identity there, I think, is student. And, if you're a person that votes in Canadian elections, there's another identity you can claim there, that you're citizen. Or if you're a parent, you have an identity as a parent. In other words, there's a tremendous continuum of identities. And one dimension of the human personality being hauled aside and made the constituent of the entire personality ignores these wider variations. And I think the first variation, if we want to keep a society, should be citizen. And as I said, in the universities, it should be student. Other times, by the way, you will identify as a worker in a given situation, or in the family context, you have others. There's a million identities that coalesce, constitute the individual and in his or her relations with family and the rest of the world. Why this sliver of identity becomes the identity puzzles me.
well, you're talking like a liberal, Rex.
Dear God.
I mean, a classic liberal. We grew up in our era, and we assumed that classic liberalism was the ultimate democratic way to be. We did not see that it had to be improved upon, because what were our values? The importance of the individual, that was central to dignity of the human being, is to be treated, every individual to be treated as an individual, equality under the law, certain basic human rights that had to be attended to for every citizen. I mean, these were all, to me, very logical and very obvious things. If you had told us that our group identity, based on the color of our skin or our ethnicity, was going to tell us how we had to think about something, what our opinion had to be. Remember Joe Biden said to his black interviewer,
Yes.
if you can't choose your vote between me and Donald Trump, then you ain't black. Like, what he meant was, there's only one appropriate perspective for a black person to have, and any black person that doesn't take that attitude, they're not really black. So we did not envision this kind of a society, and we're still stuck in our old white supremacist, like a colonialist way of thinking. And honestly, by the way, we also believed in freedom of expression was very important to us, and it still is very important to us. But 62% of university students do not believe that freedom of expression should trump hurting somebody's feelings. So,
well, we're in a strange and interesting world, and also one that has, I think, a fair lacing of potential problems of the deep thing. Anyway, Barbara, I'll put it this way: from one old imperialist to another. I thank you very much for joining me. It's a treat to chat with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rex. It was great to be with you. I really enjoyed it.